So coming up this weekend is of course going to be the return of the UFC, but we are also going to be seeing LFA 199 being broadcast on UFC Fight Pass on Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. This is going to be a pretty solid card. Now I do think that the main card is significantly stronger than the prelims, which is why I am going to be talking about the main card in this video. But it's also going to be the final LFA card before LFA 200, which is going to be a pretty big deal, of course. Another thing that I do want to say is I did write an article on this card on just the main card, but it was quite a few days ago now, and if you did want to read that and everything else that I put up there, as well as what Angelo and Jacob do on the WeWantPicks.com website, it is $10 per month, but you get so much value there, and there's going to be quite a few pretty major announcements over the next couple of weeks from We Want Picks, so there's going to be more content on there than ever before. They've also got an app as well, so yeah, if you just sign up using my code ARTEM, you will get a 10% off any membership there. Now, let's just get into the prelims very quickly. I did want to just mention a couple of fighters making their debuts here. Gabrielle McComb is a multiple-time IBJJF champion. She's a one-time world champion and a one-time junior world champion, and that world championship did come at the black belt level. She has also won quite a few other international tournaments. Two, just a big-time grappler, making her pro debut here in MMA, hasn't fought as an amateur, but what's quite cool about her is she is 27 years old, so still has quite a few years to really develop before maybe she could get a call to the UFC. Another debut that's going to be a pretty big deal is Shiloh Ladd, is the brother of Aspen Ladd. He is a light heavyweight prospect. He went 10-0 as an amateur, which is a pretty big deal. And he's fighting against Thailand Matris, who had a winning record as an amateur and was also 1-0 now as a pro. Should be a pretty good prospect v prospect fight, but I think if Shiloh Ladd was to win, given the fact that his sister has competed in the UFC before, I think that you could see Shiloh Ladd in a major promotion within the next, 2 to 4 years, honestly, just given how light heavyweight isn't a super deep division in general. Now we're going to move up to the main card. The order is very likely going to be different, but a lot of these fights have been made on short notice, including this first one I wanted to talk about here, Rafael do Nascimento versus Brandon Altamore. Originally, Rafael do Nascimento was meant to fight another prospect. Altamore has accepted this fight on, I believe, 2 weeks' notice, but I could be wrong about that one. And I did look into Altamore. Shout out to the promotions that he has fought for, because they are all on YouTube, and I really do appreciate that. But the thing about Altamore is, to be honest, he hasn't fought the best competition so far in his career. He is quite small, I felt, for the weight class, but maybe he was fighting upper weight class against some of these guys. I believe it was James Pollard that was so much taller than him, and they looked a lot smaller. But Altamore, he's a grappler. He has dominated every single opponent that he has fought so far. Aside from in his pro debut, he did lose a decision. He's been winning in the first round. He's been looking good. Admittedly, not really against the best opponents though. And I feel like the size difference could matter here against do Nascimento, who actually at one point was a prospect that I was very, very high on. I do remember talking about him in some of my older videos, talking about how do Nascimento was going to be on the Contender Series, how he was a lock for the Contender Series, and then he just never ended up on the show. You know, 2022, he was on a pretty big win streak, has a first round submission win over Marcus McGee, beat Justin Wetzel, it looked all good, and then he did lose to a couple of very solid fighters aside from that. But in this one here against Altamore, I do honestly think that it is a step down in competition for Nascimento and a massive step up in competition for Altamore. Nascimento does have a lot of flaws. He's a grappler, and on the feet he just is really wild. Doesn't really have the best technique, but for the most part he just wants to crash forward, get to the clinch, get takedowns, and then uses grappling. Altamore has proven to be a good grappler, but not against great grapplers, and I do think that Nascimento is probably just going to be a little bit too much too soon here for Brandon Altamore. So I'm going to pick do Nascimento to win this fight by second or third round submission here. And now we can move up to Larry Gonzalez fighting against Billy Ray Valdez. This fight's going to be a ton of fun, but it's not going to be super high level. Now, both guys seem to be strikers for the most part, with a little bit of wrestling in the back pocket. And both guys as well don't look like they have very good striking defense. When I was watching some of Larry Gonzalez's fights, even in his wins, a lot of the time he was getting backed up and hurt, and then he'd get a big comeback KO, and maybe he'd shoot a takedown every now and then. But Larry Gonzalez, he typically doesn't look great until he gets a big win in the end. And then Billy Ray Valdez is kind of the same. Billy Ray Valdez seems to be a guy that is just going out there to try and knock you out, and he doesn't seem to have much other intention of it. His cardio isn't very good, neither is Larry Gonzalez, to be honest. But Valdez, man, he just throws massive overhands, just trying to land that big shot to get the KO. And more often than not, so far, he has landed it. Now, this is definitely not a fight that I would recommend you put money on, just given the fact that it genuinely is low-level heavyweight MMA. But I can guarantee you it's going to be a good time. This is two strikers that want to KO each other, but I think the guy that's just more likely to land out of the two is Billy Ray Valdez here. He's got like more momentum as well, but this is a hard fight to call. Gonzalez is a big guy. Maybe he wrestles. Maybe he really steps on that gas tank of Valdez, but I'm going to pick Valdez by KO. Seems like the majority do agree with that one. This next fight is very interesting because I genuinely couldn't find much tape on Said-Magomed Abdulgaziev, but I was able to watch one fight of his, and he didn't look very good in that fight. It was one of these losses that he did have, and in that fight, it was in the second round he lost, so it must have been this one. It was all in Russian, and I couldn't translate it, but I knew that it was Said-Magomed Abdulgaziev that was fighting. In this fight, he genuinely threw no volume, and then he was taken down, and then just had nothing when he was on bottom. So that wasn't very good to see. And then just another one about him in general is he just hasn't really fought that much recently. I feel like Abdulgaziev is actually probably a training partner of one of these other Russian guys that was meant to fight, but their fight got cancelled, so they found him an opponent in Terry Haig, who I think is actually a really good prospect. Terry Haig was a guy that was signed by Bellator, fought quite a few times for Bellator, twice as a professional, was a guy that they were going to build up into their prospects like they did with AJ McKee and countless other fighters as well, of course. And it was kind of always like a little bit of an unknown about how good he truly was until he went out there against Dylan Debitz, and he looked really good against Dylan Debitz. He was able to out-grapple him for all 2 rounds, and he just put on a pretty tough to keep up with pace in the wrestling and the grappling. He's very much got a smothering style where he'll get the takedown, he'll control on top, and he just won't give you much chance to escape. So I do think that Terry Haig is going to find a submission in this fight in the first or the second round. I think he's a prospect to look out for, but if you do look out for him on this card, he is not bald. As far as I know, he has a massive mullet, or at least he did 4 months ago. So yeah, definitely keep an eye out for Haig. I think if he wins this fight, and then maybe fights again, but he might not need to, he should be on the Contender Series this year. The next one, again, it's going to be fun. Couldn't find tape on Cherchayev. I genuinely tried really hard to find MMA tape on him. I even searched up his name in Russian in Google. Couldn't find a thing. But what I could find was his boxing fights, which take place in the cage, so it's boxing, but it's in the cage. So I don't really know what to expect from him. He's listed at 6'2". It's kind of hard to tell if he truly is 6'2", because that is ridiculously tall for 155 pounds. But the boxing seemed alright. So the only thing that I could really base my pick off is how does Inkter Vayasokt look? And Inkter Vayasokt is really dangerous, but I just have a lot of concerns about his wrestling. It doesn't look like he has much wrestling at all. In fact, the win that he got by Darce choke here, Calvin Bowen, went out there with intentions to wrestle against him and was finding a pretty significant amount of success against him in the wrestling until he did manage to get that Darce choke in the second round. On the feet, he's pretty dangerous. He very clearly is a striker. So if this truly is going to be a boxer in Cherchayev versus just a dangerous wild striker in Vasyok, I can once again almost guarantee you that this is going to be a fun fight. But once again, I wouldn't put money on it. And in all honesty, I am just going to pick Cherchayev here, because if he has any wrestling, and I truly mean any wrestling at all, he should be able to take down Vasyok, but it's very hard to tell given that I was only able to find him boxing in an MMA cage. So let's see how it goes. I'm going with Cherchayev. By assault, he could be fun. He's from Mongolia. The UFC, to my knowledge, only have one or two, I think two Mongolian fighters on the roster right now. And although he doesn't have the best record, if he was to beat Cherchayev and then maybe a couple more people, he would have a 10-4 record. So, like, that's not really too bad, I guess. Now we can move up to Josh Hokit fighting against John Lopez. Hokit is once again, just like Teo Hayek, a guy that has fought for Bellator. 2 pro fights, 2 fights for Bellator. Once again, to be fair, not really the best professional competition, but he's only 2-0, so you can't really expect him to be fighting the best of the best right now. I do think that he's quite good. Now, he actually does have a background in wrestling. He's an All-American wrestler, I believe, multiple times. And he also has played college football and played for the NFL, or at least been rostered for the NFL. I'm not too sure because I'm not a follower of the NFL, I'll be honest, being in New Zealand. But Josh Hokit, he's got an athletic background. He looks to be pretty good. The way that he's been winning his fight so far is pretty quickly by submission at heavyweight, which is quite impressive. He just takes his opponent down, and then he works from there. Now, I do think in this fight, he should be a little bit better than Lopez everywhere. I was able to watch some fights of Lopez. I watched his pretty massive KO loss to Willie Tarpley in a fight which I think that he was arguably winning before Tarpley knocked him out. But Lopez seems to be a wrestler as well. He wants to go out there and get the takedown. So maybe it just comes down to who gets the first takedown. But I will say John Lopez didn't look that comfortable in the striking in the fights that I was able to see of his. So I think that Hokit, although not really showcasing an insane amount of striking himself, he seems to have pretty good boxing behind him, seems to have a good jab, seems to be pretty confident on the feet. Maybe he can make something happen here, but I do think that we just see Hokit go out there again, use that wrestling base that he does have to quite a bit of success, take down John Lopez, and end up finding the submission in this fight. Another short notice replacement fight in the main event now, a 3-round main event, it is worth noting. Ari Farias, he was actually meant to originally fight against Zabit Shusupov, but Shusupov pulled out, and now we have Farias taking on Eric Visconde. And here's the thing about Ari Farias. He is really good. He is 35 years old, so he is getting up there in age, but I think you probably could still talk about him as someone that could make their way into the UFC despite being a little bit older. He's always kind of been knocking on that door, but for some reason or another, he gets turned back. You know, this loss to Marcos Breno. Breno's now fighting for Bellator and the PFL. John Sweeney is the LFA champion right now. In my opinion, should actually be in the UFC, but he missed weight recently, so it makes things a little bit awkward. But Ari Farias, he's a grappler. And that's it. It really is it. I have been surprised by Ari Farias in the past every time by how uncomfortable he looks in the striking. This is a guy that has 18 professional fights, and he just does not look like he wants to be on the feet in any moment of the fight. He genuinely wants the takedowns, and he shoots for takedowns pretty regularly, and doesn't get them all the time, but when he does eventually get them, he does have very strong top control and very good submission grappling. The short notice opponent now that he is fighting is Eric Visconde, and Visconde is going to be a much, much better striker in this fight. I wouldn't say that Visconde is the most technical striker by any means, but he is a pressure-forward guy. He wants to come forward, he wants to box on the inside, he wants to throw big shots. He's coming off a pretty impressive win over Bursamanko Abidibat in that fight, which he was beating up Abidibat, on the feet for the most part, and then was shooting takedowns. To be fair, Bursamanko was doing a very good job of defending the takedowns, so Visconde was kind of forced to strike with him, but nonetheless, it didn't really matter because Bursamanko was losing on the feet anyway to Visconde. And I think that's the difference here, man, because I think that if Visconde comes out here with a pretty smart game plan, and that game plan being, despite being a grappler myself, not to go out there and shoot offensively against Farias. He did get caught in a guillotine against Joe Pedro Saldana. I would actually quite like to see Visconde come out here with a striking game plan. Farias is not comfortable on the feet. I don't think he's a very good striker, but I think that if Farias did get on top, he could very well, and maybe, I don't know if it would be easy, but he could win the fight, and probably would win the fight if he can get his way going. But I like Visconde because he's got more tools. Visconde is the much better striker here, much more comfortable in the cage, on the feet especially, And even then, he can grapple. Now, I don't think he's as good as grappling at Farias, but he's still a very talented grappler in his own right. Once again, only taking the fight on a couple of weeks' notice, but I do think that he's still going to be able to go out there and defeat Ari Farias here by either knockout, but probably more likely a decision. So I'm going to pick Eric Visconde. There are no odds out here for this LFA card. Odds will probably drop eventually on Bet Online at least. But yeah, definitely check out this card. If you've been starved for MMA and you just really need more MMA before the UFC comes back, you can check this one out. It is going to be pretty good. A couple of good prospects on there. And the winner of Farias versus Visconde honestly should just sign to the UFC because they are talented. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And I'll see you guys in the next video, which should be a good one. If you're a fan of MMA prospects, you'll like the video that I do have coming out next. So see you guys in the next one.